In this Neverwinter Nights Tactica vlog, we're going to explore Arcane spell failure and ask the question, framework it, when is it an acceptable risk? How do we approach that playing a wizard, a sorcerer, or a bard? So essentially in Neverwinter Nights, we've got kind of two subsets of magic. We've got divine magic utilized by clerics and druids, and arcane magic utilized by sorcerers, wizards, and to a different extent, bards. And there's this idea in the 3.5, 3.x D&D rule set that in order to cast an arcane spell, you've got some verbal components, you're making some intricate hand gestures, you're moving your arms around, just like the animated graphics, you're doing something. You're invoking the forces of magic and directing them to the spell effect. And if there's something that hinders that possibility, and that could be wearing armor, or it could be you're attacked, you have to make a check. You have to see what happens. There's a chance that the spell will fizzle out and not be cast. So what we see in wearing armor, just like a rogue or a stealth class has to deal with dexterity penalties for wearing heavier armor, we see arcane spell casting failure. There's a chance, depending on light, medium, heavy, bucklers, shields, heavy shields, it's going to interfere with your spell casting, and there's a chance your spell will not work, obviously increasing from light, medium to heavy. So within that framework, you'll look and say, well, as a wizard and a sorcerer, my primary interaction with the game is magic. I don't wear armor at all. I mean, I don't take the feats for that. Even if I took the feats, my armor class is never going to get high enough just on physical armor, even utilizing magical armor. I'm going to get my defense by spells. So I really don't have to worry about spell failure. As a bard, there are ways, I'm not going to give away any spoilers in terms of gear, but there are a number of light or medium armors that don't have spell failure, so you can utilize those. But also, while spells are important for the bard also utilizes actual combat, use magic device, massive game changer, but also bard song, being able to interact with the game from there. So a little bit of spell failure might not be the worst thing because you're primarily, not that the bard doesn't have damage dealing spells, but primarily you're using it to buff and enhance your song, your defense, and your combat abilities. Well, let's explore this with our arcane spell failure because most builds, it's not going to be a problem. There are times as a wizard or a sorcerer where you might want to dip into light or medium armor, or possibly heavy armor. Now, how you do this, there's two ways to do it. The first, of course, and easiest would be to possibly dip in one level of fighter, where by buying that level buy-in, you're not really diluting your pure wizard or pure sorcerer class in terms of DC, right? Everything in Neverwinter Nights being built on that D&D 3.x engine, it's all about the difficulty checks. So before I even roll my D20 to see if you can resist my spell, based on my intelligence or my charisma and my magic gear, I'm at like plus 38 before the game even rolls that D20 to see what happens. It's all about the difficulty check. Anytime you dip into other levels or you dilute that from your primary class, it's going to be hard to get your DC jacked up to that point. But taking one or two levels or a couple of levels, especially if you're playing level 20 or higher, that's your end game, it's not really a problem. But there are other times where perhaps I will spend a feat or two to buy into light and medium armor. Or if I'm going to take a prestige class that gives me that light armor, now I'm utilizing it from that perspective. The challenge here, of course, why you would want to dip into that and deal with arcane spell failure. This is kind of an alternate wizzy or sorcerer build. No spoilers on gear. You're going to have to find it yourself. But when you go to that inventory screen, you have a number of slots of armor, equipment, and gear that you can wear. Helmets, bracers, weapons, rings, amulets. There are going to be some things you can have in inventory that are clickies that are going to let you, a perfect example would be like wands. I don't necessarily have to have it equipped. I can have it in the inventory, put it on the clicky bar, and blast it out. But that utilizes charges. A lot of gear is persistent effects. So there are suits of armor in the game. Yes, they've got a magic bonus. They're going to do this and that, but they have some clickies or they have some effects that are constantly on as long as you're wearing that suit of armor. When you're playing a wizard or a sorcerer, you are limited primarily to robes or non-armor. By just taking light armor, that opens up a massive amount of inventory possibilities, and you can fully utilize that armor slot. But now you're dealing with arcane spell failure. So sometimes on an alternate wizard or sorcerer build, you might dip into some armor, not to get your armor class up. You don't really care about the armor class rating because you're going to get that through mage armor. You're going to get that through haste. You're going to get that through other gear. You're going to get that through displacement effects, concealment effects, invisibility effects. You're wearing that armor to open up more persistent effects. Now, of course, the challenge here is you are burning feats if you're not dipping into fighter or other character classes. And the question is, what percentage becomes acceptable in terms of a loss? Casting a spell, if it fizzles out, it's not so much, it's different than pen and paper, D&D 3.5, where there's enough chances in enough places. Really in Neverwinter Nights, you just have to get through the immediate encounter. So if I did miscast a spell or two, it's not like this is all I have for the entire adventure and there'll be no action points to rest. I will be able to rest and recover. So spell failure from that perspective doesn't hurt as bad as the tabletop version, but where it does kind of get you is that's less clickies, that's less attacks. There are some encounters in the game, both the core modules and different expansion content, where you're like, I'm blasting this boss with everything that I have. I've blown through all my spells, everything, and now I'm using like that Rod of Cold 1d4 -1 that I picked up way at the start of my adventures, and I'm just clicking and clicking and clicking. There are times where you will run out of spells, and you don't necessarily want to waste those spells on a miscast, especially if you're a wizard and you have to divide those memorization slots up, as opposed to a sorcerer where you've got those casts per day, per level. So one could say, look, by the time you jump into medium, and heavy's just off the table, but by the time you jump into medium, that starts to stack with spell failure. But light armor and certain light armors, I think that is an acceptable risk, an acceptable chance. It's going to happen every now and then. It's kind of like playing a wild mage in Baldur's Gate. It's going to happen with that wild surge, but it's controllable. It's okay. And the benefits of having the persistent effects and opportunity of the armor outweigh the spell failure. But playing a pure sword and board, this is why one of the challenges we see if you're going kind of fighter and wizard, sword and board and battle mage and stuff like that, they don't stack well in D&D 3.5. Based on the difficulty check, you're not going to be high enough in either class, but also arcane spell failure with a shield, wearing full plate, all geared up with a helmet. It's essentially going to shut down your spells, even if you're utilizing meta magic to boost those up at higher spell levels. It's often not enough, or it comes at such a high price. So from that perspective, playing a sorcerer, playing a wizard, arcane spell failure, is there a level that is acceptable? And maybe do you burn a feat to open up that armor slot? Or absolutely just no amount is worth it, and it's not worth burning any feats or taking a dip in any level to make that possible.